Well, my story at Westminster starts earlier on than most of the pastors here. Right after I graduated from St. Olaf College, I moved to the Twin Cities because my future spouse was living here, and I had applied to seminary. And because my dad is a Presbyterian minister and had left the church that I grew up in, he rightly advised me to become a member of Westminster and seek to come under care of Westminster's session for the ordination process. And I was a member here for 4 years while I went through seminary and accepted my first call to a church in Indianapolis for a Lilly residency. And Westminster saw me through that whole experience and cared for me and supported me in my call process, supported me both financially as well as spiritually. Coming to Westminster was such a liberating gift, and it created a new sense of urgency in me for the justice that the gospel calls us to. And so I developed a new language here at Westminster and was able to articulate so much of what I thought the Spirit was doing in the city and in the world, and how God calls on us to reach for making heaven possible here on earth. Even when I was away from Westminster for 6 years, working at that church in Indianapolis, and then for 4 years in St. Louis, the messages and the way this community lives and moves and has its being, those things followed me, and I carried them with me and always felt a connection back to this place, because the Spirit is active here at Westminster, and it draws us into different spaces and places. When I came back to Westminster, plans for Open Doors, Open Futures were already in the works, but it would be at least a year and a half before we broke ground. And the Merrimark had been purchased, and I remember the days leading up to that time of construction. I remember the plans for creative time, and it was just an interesting time to be joining a community as a pastor. So much had happened before I came, and so much was to come, and the last 5 years have really been a series of changes and flurry of activity and planning and thinking and dreaming about the future and what God is calling Westminster to do and be. And we've responded in faithful ways, using our space as it's been built to grow, and not only to preserve what we have been, but to grow into what God is calling us to be. So I remember sitting in Jim Dayton's office, at the architect's office in the boardroom, and we were picking out chairs and talking to the folks who study sound in spaces like Westminster Hall. And I remember sitting there and just dreaming about all the gatherings and all the people we could bring together in this space. And so that's where my imagination started for what we could do in Westminster Hall. And I'd love to go in there and take you in there and tell you a little bit more about it. So when I come in Westminster Hall, I immediately feel myself, for the most part, relaxing. It's a place that in this church I feel like has so much architectural interest and so much modernity to it. The windows that face out towards Nicollet Mall remind me that we're in the heart of the city, and they help me to engage beyond my own understanding of the physical presence of the church. There's this dualism about Westminster Hall, right? It's It's sort of this clearing in the forest in the middle of the city, and it helps you rest and know that this is sacred space. And I feel the Spirit active within these walls. There's nothing in this space that is exactly the same. The angles are all different, and there's some sort of kind of chaos about it. And then there's this definite order to it because the walls are this beautiful, warm wood. And so it feels at once homey, but also it allows your mind to expand and grow and think about all the possibilities of what could happen in here. I also notice, beyond the windows, the screen in Westminster Hall. And, we struggled in other parts of the building to be able to utilize technology in a really faithful, authentic, beautiful way. And so I view the screen in Westminster Hall as another window into possibilities. We use the screen at Gathered at 5 and in other events that happen into this space. And it helps lead me into ways of thinking that are artistic and visual. You can change visually what happens in here with the lighting and whatever you project. You can kind of create a curated mood in this space that I think really sets the tone for people's experience in this room and whatever they come here for. So we dreamed for a long time about what worship would look like in Westminster Hall. It's worship that is meant to bring you inwards in this space, that sort of you're sort of surrounded by this restful but modern and hopeful atmosphere, but then you're also sent out into the rest of the world from this space and worship. So I think when people enter here, there is this sense that that God is meeting them where they are, that there aren't necessarily symbols of worship that are always in here, but there's a sense that it's sacred for the individual person that enters the room. And I think that's a really progressive, open, and affirming way to think about Christianity going forward into the 21st century. The way that we combine worship and a meal afterwards in this space for Gathered at 5, it creates a sense of community, that there's no separations, there's no boundaries. All are welcome to gather at Christ's table in this space for Gathered at 5. And then we break bread together afterwards. For other events in this space, it's been an interesting thing to develop and work on events and have the creativity of a room that's so flexible. So everything from Christmas dinners, where this space is completely transformed into sort of a dinner theater, to the Beyond Sunday Connections events that happen in this room, where women give testimony to their experiences of faith. This space is housing the stories of our community that are helping us look forward to be the community that we are called to be into the 21st century. So I'm so grateful for how Westminster Hall inspires us to be church anew and draws us into God's beloved world beyond our walls. I think that is what Westminster Hall does for us. It's been so wonderful to have this opportunity to reflect on Westminster Hall, and the more that I think about Westminster Hall, the more that I realize that this space is the one that is holding our community together through the power of the Holy Spirit, that we are doing worship in this space. And I know that it is the cornerstone of many of your weeks as we are apart but are still the church. And I'm so grateful to God and to this community for making Westminster Hall a possibility. So I hope that when we are together again, we will have the best time coming together in Westminster Hall and resting together and enjoying one another's company and having a joyful feast as the people of God. So thank you for tuning in to this Places and Spaces video, and I so look forward to the day when I can see your faces in this space.